What's up, beautiful people? Welcome to episode number 2 of Bigger Than Sports, where we discuss the intersection of sports and racial justice as we look forward to dismantling systemic racism, police brutality, and so much more in America. I'm your host, Chris Williamson, and joining me for my second episode is none other than St. John's head basketball coach, Mike Anderson. Coach, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to just conversate, just sitting down and just having a great conversation.
Me too. So growing up in Birmingham, Alabama at the peak of the civil rights movement, you mentioned in a New York Post interview that you could write a book about all the experiences that you've had. What's one story that comes to mind when you think about your first chapter?
Well, I think, when growing up in Birmingham in the inner city, I could remember, I can't remember when I was young, probably until I got out of high school, of actually going to a restaurant. I cannot. I can vividly remember there was a restaurant in the area that I live. It was Ensley. The part of Birmingham was called Ensley. And I can remember always getting takeout food, but I'm a young kid and, in a predominantly black neighborhood. So I thought nothing of it. And but as I've grown and got exposed to going into restaurants, going to other places, I'm going like, man, back then in those days, they basically were serving us out of the back door.
To see all that happen, all the racism, all the police brutality during that era, now more than 50 years later, we're experiencing the same things. For somebody like you who has a different perspective than me, because you've lived through a lot of this, what does it do to your spirit to see the Ahmaud Arbery's, to see the George Floyd's, to see the Breonna Taylor's?
Well, it just kills my spirit. It hurts my heart. It's kind of like, have things gotten better? In a sense, probably not, because back in those days, you didn't really just see it blatantly taking place. Now with social network, the telephones, and it's kind of like it's out in broad daylight. And you hear stories, back in the past of, people getting hung or just, just really getting beat down. It just so many things that took place. And now we're seeing some of the same things. And the part that really bothers me is blatant as it's taking place. It's like the laws, the legislations, all the policies that are in place, it's like it's protecting, the police. And you got, to me, policing obviously is an important job. It's a stressful job. But I think at the same time, you got some bad ones out there. And but to see it, the way that it's been, the Derek Floyd, when you think about the George Floyd situation, when you think about, to me, it was like a lynching on TV. And if that didn't hurt your soul, if that didn't stir your spirit, and I think it has stirred a lot of spirits, not only, the black community, I think the white community as well. And so I'm just praying and hoping that there's a movement that we can really get some of these, some of the policies that are in place. The chokehold, you think about that, the Breonna Taylor, the no knock is like a combustion and an explosion. So something's got to be done. Some action's got to start taking place.
And you mentioned the no-knock warrant in the Breonna Taylor case. On the anniversary of when Emmett Till's murderers were acquitted, her murderers were acquitted as well because they were not directly charged for her death. Instead, her neighbor's apartments got more justice than she did. When you saw that decision come down from Attorney General Daniel Cameron, what was your reaction? Because for me, I saw my mother, I saw my sister, I saw my girlfriend in Breonna Taylor.
Without a doubt. I'm looking at my grandkids. I got grandkids. I got my daughter, and it's kind of numbed me because there was nothing done. It was. Can you imagine? They charged a guy for shooting into neighbors, and they killed this young lady. This young lady, she's not here anymore. And so it really it hurts at the core. All the protesting, all the action that we're involved. We're talking about the voting. Obviously, our vote has to we really got to put our voting in action. But we got to have some action I think at the local level. I mean, we've got to mobilize, we got to organize, we got to strategize, we got to do all that. And it can't just be us. It just can't be the Black community. It's got to be the white community as well. And I think that's the only way we're going to make some changes, because for that to take place and no one was charged, that's just not right. It is flat out wrong.
Now, you mentioned it can't just be us. It can't just be the Black community. One of your white players stood up and spoke about the injustices and things going on. What type of discussions have you had with your players in dealing with something really for the first time in their lives, seeing this play out?
Well, it's something that I want to hear their stories. I want to hear what they, obviously they may have been in some situations that, they probably hadn't talked about. I try to create a family atmosphere with our players, and it's so funny because, I brought a police officer here this past week, and we was talking about the very thing we're talking about right now, and in terms of how you conduct yourself. I think we got to educate our kids. I think more than important, because there are going to be some confrontation, not necessarily confrontation, but they're going to be where they're going to get stopped, and you want them to come out of there alive, as opposed to having confrontation.
Coach, you mentioned all the racial injustices that we're having to deal with as a country: the education system, the healthcare system, the housing system, police brutality. Another facet of that is Black head coaches, the lack of Black head coaches at the Division I basketball level. At the Major 6 conferences, only 19% are Black head coaches, yet 80% of the players are Black. What needs to happen to make sure there are more coaches who look like you at head coaching positions?
You got to remember, who are the decision makers, whether it be the ADs, whether it be the search firms, the presidents. There are not many Black administration. I think that's one of the things that we talked about. And I'm involved with a group called ABIS, Advancement of Blacks in Sports. And that's one of our deal is to try to get where we're inclusive in the whole process. Whether it be, there's one Black search firm in the country. That's it. And those guys are the ones that put people in position to have opportunities to interview and things of that nature. In terms of the coaching, you think about the coaches that, we lost a great one in Coach John Thompson, one of the first Black coaches to win a national championship. And he had the platform, and I thought he did an unbelievable job of opening up doors for coaches like myself.
Nolan Richardson, John Chaney, John Thompson, those guys paved the way, as you said, and the rate of Black head coaches was higher when they were at their prime, so to speak, because they had that type of authority and influence over the game. With Richardson, you had a first row seat because you coached with him. And I just want to know, what were some of the challenges that you had with him in a very racially tense time in Arkansas and in the South?
The challenges were because of, the color of his skin. Coach, his wife is Mexican-American. So you can imagine that, an African-American and a Mexican-American, coming into Arkansas. And but the thing I admire about him is he stayed who he was. He was true to who he was, and his players were his family. And I think as we saw, I saw it as a player, things that he was up against, and it made us want to take it up to another level. I mean, the officials against it, everybody was against it when we played. So guess what? It gave us that edge that we had to play with. I admired him for what he's done. I mean, it's amazing. He's not only a great coach, but he's a great, great man. But we do have conversation about the things that are taking place. And one of the things he says too, we got to vote. Right now, there's so much division. Never seen anything like that in our country. And this is the United States, and it's just like right now, there's not only just a pandemic, there's another plague that's taking place, and it's called the systemic racism.
It's amazing how perfect black head coaches have to be to even get the job. How frustrating is it that in 2020, Mike, we are still seen as, or we still have to work twice as hard to make sure we get a job?
They call that double standards. There's standards for the white coach here, and there's standards for the black coach here, and it's very, very unfortunate that it takes place. But if you just go back over time, it's always been there. It's always been there. It's now, you make a little bit more money, but it's still there. It's still there. You got to be that much better, because as a black coach, I mean, you face a lot of scrutiny. You really, really do, and at times you got to have thick skin as well. But more importantly, you got. I've always coached with a chip on my shoulder. There's a saying that we're behind in the race, and I even go back to when Dr. Martin Luther King was talking about, as we try to get our civil rights, and you talk about putting us on the same page as all Americans. We're not. We're still behind, from an economical standpoint, and we're still trying to catch up. Well, the same way in the coaching. I'm behind in the race, and the only way I know how to catch up is I got to outrun those people that are in front of me, and so we continue to trying to catch up.
One of the questions that I ask my guests to wrap up the segment is, what do you think people can do right now to make tangible change to help eradicate racism and police brutality and white supremacy? So I want to give you the floor to answer that question now.
We got to value each other's life like we value our own. I think that's the biggest thing. We got to value the other people's lives as much as we value our own, no matter what color they are. Because we all bleed red. Trust me, we all bleed red. I think that's the most important thing there. And at the same time, I think let's find the commonalities. A lot of times we look at the differences and all that. There's a lot more common that we have in common than it is that we are different. And I think, in sports, when you look at, the NBA, the NFL, and all those guys, I applaud those guys. Colin Kaepernick, he don't look as dumb as he was when he went out and did what he did, because he was raising concerns. And now everyone sees that. Okay, so now let's react to it, and let's react to it the right way. I think that's all it is. Let's treat each other like human beings.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time. You've been a wonderful guest, offered a lot of great, valuable insight that I didn't have before. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I appreciate you, and thanks for having me on, and go Giants.